All right, today we need to talk about plot. We've talked about plot before, so hopefully some of this is familiar, but let's review it again because it's going to be really important for your understanding of the stories that we'll be reading. Plot is basically the time and sequence of events in a story, and it is like links in a chain. It's what pulls the story forward and hopefully keeps us curious and moves us forward with it. Go ahead and press pause and take some time to look through this plot diagram example of the Three Little Pigs story. Okay, all plots need a conflict, and a conflict is the problem or the situation that carries the plot forward. It's also hopefully what hooks us as readers by gaining our curiosity, but it's that problem that the characters are trying to solve throughout the narrative. And you may remember in first semester we talked about external versus internal conflicts. An external conflict is between a character and some other force outside of the character. So we use the examples of man versus nature, man versus man, or man versus society. Those are all three examples of external conflicts versus internal conflict, which is when the conflict is within the character, him or herself. And just three examples of something that could drive an internal conflict might be self-doubt, guilt over having done something, a struggle to make a decision. Those are all examples of internal conflicts. That's within the character, him or herself. There is no outside force that they are struggling with. You can think of a plot this way. It's just like a house. It needs a frame, or a human body. We need a skeleton. It needs that framework to hold everything together. And there are usually four parts of a plot. There's the exposition, the complication, the climax, and then the resolution. Exposition is when the characters, the conflict are all introduced. Complication is what occurs as the characters work towards resolving the conflict. The climax is that point in the story where we know how things are going to turn out, and resolution is when those loose ends get wrapped up. So let's look at each of those sections a little more closely with some examples. So exposition, it's the opening of the story, characters and their conflict are introduced. Here's an example for you. I've highlighted, so young William and King are characters, and then in turquoise is the conflict. Young William didn't mind his hard work as the king's stable boy because he loved horses. The king, however, was miserable because his kingdom had been invaded by a large fire-breathing dragon who smelled to high heaven. Complication, that's moving up towards the climax. So these are the problems that will be encountered as William attempts to solve the problem. William set out to kill the dragon in order to help the king. While he was riding into the woods, several robbers tried to hijack his horse. Poor William felt himself losing courage. So here's this William hoping to go out and solve the main conflict of this dragon, but he runs into a complication, and that's that these robbers try to steal his horse from him. Next is the climax. And this is the key scene in the story that is the most tense or exciting, and it's when we learn what the outcome of the conflict is going to be. So let's go back to William. When he had just about decided to give up the chase and return home, William found himself staring down the dragon's throat. Closing his eyes, he hurled his sword into the dragon's windpipe. The monster gagged and began to die. So the climax here, we know how the story is going to end. William's going to make it. He kills the monster. Resolution, also called falling action, it occurs at the end of the story, and we know that all the struggles are over, and we know what's going to happen with all the characters. So here we go again with William. When he returned to the palace with the dragon's head, William became a hero, although he had to spend the next 2 weeks soaking himself to get rid of the smell of a very dead dragon. So I've highlighted for you in pink that resolution piece. So let's review on this plot diagram with our friend William. So the exposition, that's the characters in the conflict, and we have William and the king, and they have a very stinky dragon to deal with. The rising action, Or complications, William gets hijacked on his way to kill the dragon. The climax, William throws his sword down the dragon's throat and kills it. Falling action, William returns to the king with the dragon's head, and the resolution is he's a hero and everybody lives happily ever after. Okay, so go ahead and move on and answer the questions in this form. Please refer back to this video if you have any further questions.